experience. I happened to go through a Deweyite progressive school until I was about 8th grade. And I remember everything. There were no tests, no ranking, I didn't know I was a good student. Everybody was supposed to be a good student. I mean, I knew I'd skipped a year, but nobody paid any attention to it. Okay, I was a small skip in class, that's the only affair. When I got to high school, I went to the city that I was in, had 2 academic high schools, one for boys, one for girls. So I went to the boys' academic high school. The students at the high school were kids who were planning to go to college, and they wanted to study, they wanted to learn, and so on. So the teachers could kind of sit back and watch, this sinecures. I don't remember a thing from high school. I passed all the exams, got good marks, got a scholarship, but it's like a blank. I remember almost nothing. What you do on your own to remember. What's forced on you from the outside is like pouring water into a vessel, pour it out of you. I remember studying once. I wanted to take an advanced placement exam when I got to college in German, learning German. So I took off a month and I memorized 3,000 word dictionary, learned some rules and so on. Okay, passed the exam. The same sort of thing a couple of weeks later I forgot about. I'm sure you've had that experience. It's the normal experience of forced education from the outside. And I can see it with my own grandchildren and with teachers. I was talking to a teacher the other day. I was telling a 6th grade teacher, she was telling me that something came up in class, and some of the kids were interested. Came up to the desk afterwards and asked, can they look into it? Want to do something with it? She had to tell them, you can't do it because you have to study to pass this exam next. What they call here the MCATs, the national exams. And the teacher has to do that. The teachers, first of all, the students have to do it for themselves. The teacher's salary depends on it. And it depends on grading the teachers by progress. So in other words, if a teacher encourages a student to do something that the kid is interested in and will learn something from teachers being honest. That's the system that's being imposed. And it's getting worse.
How should it be reformed?
What?
How should it be reformed?
It should turn into a free education system where people do what kids pursue their own interests and are encouraged to do so, not just random. But the teacher's role is just to, actually, back in the 18th century, this was discussed at the beginnings of the modern education system. And during the Enlightenment, the imagery was, we don't want education to be like pouring water into a vessel. We want it to be like laying out a string along which the student will pursue that student's own course. So sort of give a kind of a general guideline. Here's something you're interested in. Then do it yourself. Then you'll learn something that'll stick with you. It doesn't matter. In fact, here there's a famous physicist, world famous physicist, who teaches freshman courses here. And, he's kind of famous because in the first freshman class, when students ask, what are we going to cover this semester? He says, it doesn't matter what we cover. It matters what you discover. Okay, so there's no fixed amount that you have to cover. It doesn't make any difference. If you discover something, that'll be important for yourself. And you'll know how to go on.
There have been several debates of yours speaking on the subject of the education policy in the United States. And you say, this is one of your quotes, and you say it's an indoctrination of the young. How has this molded older generations? And
that's an interesting phrase. Actually, it's not my phrase. That phrase comes from an important book, which you might want to read. It's called Crisis of Democracy. It was a book written right after the 60s. It's not written by reactionaries. It's written by liberal internationalists. In fact, these are the people who staffed the Carter administration. It's basically where they come from Europe, the United States, and Japan, 3 industrial societies. And they were concerned that there's too much democracy. The 60s were frightening because there was a democratic awakening. A lot of people became active. People who were usually passive and apathetic became active and involved, and that's a danger. So we have to beat them back into obedience and passivity. And one thing they were concerned about was young people, of course, because they were at the heart of it. And they criticized what they called, I'm quoting now, not my phrase, the failure of the institutions responsible for the indoctrination of the young. That's the schools, universities, the churches. They're failing to indoctrinate the young properly. That's why you see them out in the streets talking about civil rights and ending the war and women's rights and so on. So we've got to indoctrinate them better. And that's what you've been seeing for the last 30, 40 years. Efforts to indoctrinate the young better. And these are the liberal prescriptions. You go over to the right-wing side, it's much harsher. And that's what you see. That's No Child Left Behind. That's tuition rises. All of the stuff is of a piece.
And I guess your assistant just called time on us, but it's been a wonderful conversation we've had. Last thing I'm basically wanting to ask you is, for this documentary, we've talked to people that have been crying because they don't feel that they're counted anymore. They feel that they're counted out. Students that they've just given up.
What can we do?
What can we do? What can we show in this documentary? Where should we go?
Take a look at Cairo School in Cairo. The conditions are comparably harsher and worse. Or take a look at our own history. I mean, say, take a walk down the halls of MIT. Okay, what you'll see is half women, third minorities, informally dressed, meaning informal relations. That's MIT today. You took a walk down the halls in 1960, a couple of years after I got here. White males, well-dressed, deferential, doing the work, not asking any questions. How'd that happen? And it didn't happen just here, it happened all over the country. Well, what happened? Because the young people decided to do something about it. And it made it a much more civilized society.
Okay.